So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Mashiyach the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiyach laid waste for many centuries. As we read it in Mashiyach the prophet, let's then make an analysis of what's going on in the world, so then we are acquainted why we should study then so much the holy instructions and also the prophets. Let's then first make an analysis of China, the leader of the new trades system of this new restoration period. Where do we find then the evidence of China being the leader? Very simply, we read then Daniel, the 12th chapter, and then Daniel, as we can understand very simply, he was then the financial minister of the kings he worked under. Obviously, when you understand a financial minister at the time, what can we then conclude as far as his work being yet a prophet on behalf of the Gentiles? Because when we read Daniel, he was in exile because Israel was not obedient to the yearly Shabbat. For 490 years, Israel had owned the land. They never let the land rested as it should have. So then they were 70 years in captivity in order for the land to rest. So when the Creator speaks, it's very serious. Because of the disobedience of Israel, they went into exile, and then Babylon was then the absolute total ruler of its time. Thus then it was the head of gold. Since we understand tabernacling was on the land of Israel and was absolutely a place for guidance of the nations. But then after a while Israel had turned to itself, and they began to get blind as far as the world's objectives. They began to turn to each other in pleasurable situations, and they forgot how to become and be the leader of nations as per the instructions of Mashiyach. As a result, they destroyed their own prophets. They destroyed Mashiyach. Obviously, they were very mean to Yirmiyahu. And most of the prophets Israel rejected because they turned to themselves for pleasure rather than understanding they are the guidance of the nations. Because of these, what can we understand as far as Israel is concerned? Let's evaluate what's going on in the land of Israel, as we can understand these because of the latest news. The Prime Minister of Israel has decided to get rid of the financial minister and also the justice minister. And he has then claimed for earlier elections in next year. In a very short time, in a few months, he wants election. After evaluating the situation very closely, we can understand very clearly a big portion of his moves is done in the flesh. So then, there is another problem. Israel has involved itself with bombarding areas of Syria, and they should not have done this. So bit by bit, Israel is acting in the flesh. They don't have yet the perspective of becoming leader of nations. Now, we understand the relationship of the United States and Israel is not in the best pace, understandably. But as far as we can understand of these nations, where we should then get our answers from? The holy instructions. Not particularly the Torah itself, because the Torah is the basis of understanding prophecy. But let's go beyond the basics of the Torah and read the prophets. What then Mashiyach the prophet has said? That Israel should be the leader of the nations. Are they doing it at the moment? No, they are not. They are involved in a very precarious situation in the Middle East. The relationship with the United States is not in the best situation. And then let's then cling to the prophets and understand where we stand at. Lately, what we can hear from the Holy Instructions, as far as Daniel is concerned, he was then the minister of his time. He was very acquainted how to do trade amongst the nations. As we read then sections of the 12th chapter, it states that at the end of time, knowledge shall increase. Now, what is then the end of time? At the end of time, we are speaking of a period of roaming in the earth. When we read Daniel, the main basis and the focus of the life of Daniel was based from the statue of the 2nd chapter. Israel then was destroyed, the temple was no more directives of nations, and then the Creator himself decided of having Daniel becoming then this beacon of light as far as directives, and he was. Not only on behalf of the people of Israel, but also on behalf of the entire world. And he stated very precisely, at the end of this roaming period, from 1009 to 2009, where then the people of Israel, they were roaming in the earth without a temple, without tabernacling, then knowledge would have increased. And it did. However, this knowledge is directly related with trade. It is true that there are other kinds of knowledges also have increased. But from the viewpoint of the Holy Instructions, from Daniel's point, is trade, high knowledge of trade, synonymous of computers. So then China is then the leader of this time. China has the most sophisticated and the most advanced e-trade system. And the nations must recognize for the sake of understanding the instructions. If nations, they like it or not, it's another situation. Now, if we want to understand the Holy Instructions and understand what the Creator has given us, we must obviously go along with His ways of directing the nations. So then, what is the 10th chapter of Daniel? Daniel then, when he saw on the 2nd chapter the big statue, he saw the head of gold, then the chest and arms of silver, then the midsection of the body he saw as bronze, and then the legs of iron, and then the base of iron and clay. The 10th chapter regards the base of the statue after the Roman Empire then was destroyed. Then Daniel, as he was obviously acquainted with the statue, and he saw each of those members of the body as a specific kingdom, when he came to iron and clay, he was kind of in a situation he wasn't sure what was and what was not. But he knew for sure that it would be a leader of this period of time. So he prayed. He prayed for a long time. Then he had his answer. A nation from the east was going then to rule. Now, as we read then this section of Daniel, we must understand, prior of the ending of the 1,000 years of the Mashiyach, as if the world then had ended. It was a precursor of what we are going to experience a few years ahead when Autumn Feast comes. As if you were then in a line of production. You have then a prototype, you have then the schematics of a product of yours you want then to put into production. However, if we were in a period of 100 years ago, you would have a specific type of plant or a specific type of a place with a specific time of project for them to execute, so then you can get the product at the end of line. Then you have then a timing period, and imagine yourself with the same project, and you then transfer these 100 years later. What is it going to take place? Only the place itself. So we already had these situations of Daniel the 11th chapter taking place. However, we have then the reflection of it. Why? Because in some portions of the Holy Instructions you find then the Greco country rather than China. So you substitute then the Greco country with the China, then you have the kingdom of the East. Because in the original manuscripts are going to find at a certain point, at a certain place, then a kingdom of the eastern side of the time of Daniel. So you have a reflection. How do we get a proof of it? Don't we read it then in Hebrews, as far as the Torah being the prophetic shadows of the events? Prophetic shadows. We have to understand Leviticus 23rd chapter and then the projections of these events, and then projected them further in only changing the names. Because the Creator never mentioned the Greco country or then China. They gave obviously areas of geographical places where these kingdoms would come from. Later on, with years of editing, after the fact, then they placed the name of the country. But it wasn't so in the original manuscripts. So then, as far as the 11th chapter of Daniel, then there is the relationship with the kingdom of the east, north, and south, as it was prior of the ending of the 1,000 years of the Mashiyach. Situations from the time of Daniel until prior of the ending of the 1,000 years of the Mashiyach, that's when then the period of time of this prophecy was then completed. Then we project these in the future, so then we understand our time of the restoration period. It's very wise. So then, why do we say Kingdom of the North? We understand the Soviet Union is going to protect the new system. Why Kingdom of the East? China is the 10th chapter of Daniel. Daniel prayed to understand who is going to be the leader of this time of the restoration period, and there we have China. And the Kingdom of the South then is Africa, where tabernacling or directives for the nations is going to be at. Precisely where Yohanan was and formed the first holy city. And then he sent those documents, those Megillas, to those 7 cities in Asia Minor, so they were straightened out of sin. Then the angel in Galah, roughly the 10th chapter of Revelation, said then you have to go out and then prophesy again. Then he ended prophesying, then Domitian was then the Caesar of the time, decided to give him then a hard time, and he was then abducted and sent to Patmos. So the whole situation then is becoming clear. As far as we can read then of the existing news, what's going on then with the leader of trade, or then China? Mr. Jack May is then the leader of the new trade system. As we can read from the Holy Instructions, he is the very person at this point in time showing, and knowledge shalt increase. That's what he's doing. He is increasing the knowledge of trade and linking up the nations. And then on his article, we find very precisely, the Alibaba Group has thrived on linking tiny businesses in remote areas to the national and global markets. And the former patriarch Deng Xiaoping's reforms generated localized growth in areas, and obviously lacked wider market access. Speaking in New Delhi last week, Mr. May asserted that over the next 3 years, one of the key strategies of Alibaba is to globalize and to make sure that we can help more tiny businesses around the globe use our service to do trade. In many sections of the world, in the most important decisions, you find 36 months. I already said before many times, the Chinese system is coming more than a couple of years ago plus. And I even gave a time frame. And the system came. Now the only situation is then the investment icon mixed with it. And in the next 36 months, nations, they have the privilege of upgrading their systems so they can obviously receive the Chinese system for their own benefit. But it's not only linking up tiny areas of trade. There are big companies being linked with China, where they can converse with each other, eat trade-wise. So then, what's going on then with Israel and also United States? As we read then Daniel the prophet, you find sections very precisely and meticulously describe the relationship of Israel and United States, and then these countries dealing with the kingdom of the south, or then Africa. It is very detailed. However, because of these, there is then the Soviet Union must become a very important player and then giving balance to the situation. Now, the Soviet Union must make sure the world understands them. They are going to be the protector of the new Chinese system. This truly is the objective of the Soviet Union. As far as we can read then, 11th chapter of Daniel, verse 8 and 9, you find then Egypt. Egypt must receive more arms from the Soviet Union until Egypt becomes the sole authority of Northern Africa and also the area where Egypt is at. Because the sons of Ishmael, they must make their headquarters in Egypt. And they are striving for these, and they shall do it. From then on, there is a very fine line as far as the relationship with the kingdom of the south in Africa. Now we understand Egypt and then further south where tabernacling is at. Many decisions are going to be made from Egypt and then northern Africa, as far as Sudan where tabernacling is going to be at. And quite frankly, we don't know precisely where the site of the first holy city of the restoration period is going to be at. But it is an area of west side of Ethiopia, or the northwest corner of it, or then eastern side of Sudan. And then as the Hebrews, those who are selected, not every Hebrew is going to understand this, but those whom then the Creator Himself has picked to do the work, they are going to be directing nations, as per the instructions of Mashiyach the prophet, liking it or not liking it. And then comes the relationship of tabernacling in the northern area where Egypt is at, and then Soviet Union. Then later comes Israel. Then because of this obedience of the people in directing the nations, then Israel is going to become envious. And then later on, a representative of Israel is going down to the northern side of Africa and then is starting a relationship with the United States. And then many skirmishes are going to come out because of these. Because of the relationship of Israel and United States. Not because of Egypt and tabernacling. Neither the countries of Northern Africa. Because Israel and United States, they have limited knowledge of what the prophets stated it. They try to combine their own desires, what they should be on their viewpoint, versus what the prophets said to do and observe. But as they learn these, the only benefit is they can get their souls saved. So then, is that going to be easy? No. It's not going to be easy, as it was never easy for the prophets. In fact, sometimes it was so hard, Israel ended up destroying their own prophets. Now, should we be sensitive? Yes, we should. We should never react in a way that is abusive. We should watch and direct sensibly and wait for the answers. Sometimes the Creator Himself is doing a mighty work in front of the people, and people, they twist around and they don't understand the prophecies. So step by step, and then answers, they begin to come. Now, as far as United States, U.S. is not prepared for the new system. In fact, they are so angry with China because they think China has taken its place when it's not China's fault. This is what then we are reading from the Holy Instructions. U.S. had its period. Couple of 100 years out of 1,000 was given to them, whereas 800 years was given then to Great Britain. Now, most often, the older brother finds the information and then becomes the mediator. As Mr. May then is going around the world globalizing the new system, obviously Great Britain must come up with at least an understanding of what to do with the market or with the old system of markets and upgrade them to receive the new system. Because that's the way it's going to be, liking it or not. And rather than wasting these 36 months and trying to come up with the crazy ideas on how to control other nations, and obviously it won't work, then they should analyze what they can do in order to have this new system implemented or implemented with their old. So then, what is Africa then? Africa is going through so many troubles over the centuries, but it's coming a time that is ending. Africa is very rich in minerals, and these must be used for the future technological works. Most importantly, the Congo area. Mashiyach the prophet has mentioned regarding his prophecy, woe to the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. He speaks of Congo because it has to be lined up with Daniel, the 12th chapter of high knowledge. Where do we get high knowledge as far as then Congo versus then what the prophet prophesied? Materials for the electronic industry, technological equipment. You must have, for instance, coltan. Now, if you are a religious nerd, you only study religion, you don't study economics, you don't study what the prophets were explaining of economics, you don't understand minerals, you don't understand then mining, and you don't make yourself more acquainted with these, how you are going to understand the holy instructions? Congo has gold. Congo has many other kinds of materials, such as then coltan, cobalt, you name it. They have it, most of these important rare materials. And then later on, the Soviet Union then comes down to organize the area. So as you can understand, every time we study of the Holy Instructions, we read it then in the 11th chapter, backing up by Mashiyach the prophet, you understand is a solid line. Now, if you don't like it or not, then it's your problem. You have to like it and understand and go along with it, if you want to save your own soul. Now, as far as Great Britain, they are always wise. They led the world for 800 years, and most of the great discoveries was because of Great Britain. Now, Great Britain has a couple of choices. Either they go along with the United States and Israel and try to promote the old system that never worked, or they can understand and make a record of the new system and then try to adapt what they had during these 1,000 years and then linking up with the system of China. Now, the situation is, we understand it's going to be via computer, via telephones. Trade is going to be done in a much simpler way, and the stock market is nearly obsolete because it can be done via computer. When this time comes, then they must link their central banks with China's system, and China's system uses a foreign type of economical system. Now, how they're going to conciliate having their own money versus a virtual money system from abroad, and how they're going to get taxes from? And only throw up their hands and saying they are tired of it, this won't work. They have to work it through and find out a way of having these systems set up so then they can get taxes from, and then the rights and responsibilities of a computer user must be also implemented in the new system, combining with the data coming from the freighters, because when people they purchase with a outside monetary system, they has to have a record. Now, if the nations and the leaders of the nations, they are tired of it, they don't want to hear it, it won't work. They don't want to hear because they are lazy. And there are many kinds of virtual outside monetary systems, and they must be implemented, in a certain quota or tax must be charged. Each of these details done from country to country with a distinct percentage rates. These must be computed in the system, so then when a person is purchasing materials from outside sources in a certain country, when it comes to this particular country, taxes must be gathered. And if they don't do this during these 36 months, they're going to be out of luck. Chaos of the utmost danger is going to be then very near them. Reading then from Mashiyach the prophet, we know very precisely the Chinese system works, and it is going to become global because it's extremely profitable. And please don't be religious thinking, because this is a system of the dragon, nobody wants to be part of it. No, don't be stupid. What you do with your money, it's your own thing. That's why the angel said to Daniel, those who are filthy are going to become filthy. They are going to remain filthy. And those people who are clean, they're going to become even cleaner. They're going to remain clean. So what you do with your money, it's your problem. Now, if you are a religious nerd and you don't understand a word of the prophecies, then you're going to be up for a great surprise in the future. So let's be very watchful how then Great Britain is going to linking up with China as far as banking is concerned, because at this point in time you can get from your bank particular information in your computer. These are safeguarded by rights, and nobody can hack into your computer and play around with your information in a legal way where you can have then legal portions of your own system. Now, countries, they must have legal portions of your computerized system so they can get taxes from. Now, the question is, what is the percentage? Printing money is expensive. Printing money is not feasible anymore. Coins are very expensive to be made. As the system becomes more virtual, the nations can obviously save a lot. So then the next step, what is coming then? We should be more acquainted what's going on in Brazil, for instance. The nation is nearly bankrupt. The petroleum company is bankrupt, is involved in many kinds of scandals. Yet, let me read this because it's very important. Reading from the latest news, you find then China involved with many technological advances amongst the nations. You find then China being involved in space with India and many other countries of Asia. You find them making partnership with Europe. And listen to this. China and Brazil are then launching the 5th joint objective as far as equipment in space, satellite. Brazil has a direct link with the specific satellite from China. What do you think this satellite is for? No other than the new signal of a system. Though they disguise as some sort of space research of sorts and so on and so forth, is going then to become a greater way of knowledge of the space age and so on and so forth. Truly it's not. We know it's the new signal coming. So then it was launched on December 7th, precisely when then the United States was then invaded by Japanese forces in the island of Pearl Harbor, or then in Honolulu, in Hawaii. So you find the nations are linking up with China very fastly. The Vice President of Brazil, roughly a year ago, went to China and received roughly 30 times 12 digits in USD in Chinese money. So the nations are going to be linked up. As Brazil then is making its own way towards China, we hope then other countries can do, because when the time comes, it's going to be chaos for those nations who are not prepared. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.